You are standing in a ruin so vast it swallows the sun. Sand and ash crackle under your boots. Wind carries the smell of smoke, the metallic tang of blood dried into the stones. Around you, columns lie like broken bones. Paper and leather, books, ledgers, maps, curl and blacken in the heat. Somewhere down a narrow street a child cries once, then stops. You are a Mongol general. You have seen cities fall before. You have watched men scream and watched armies scatter like leaves. You have watched rivers run red and fields become a ruin. Nothing surprises you anymore. You believe you understand the anatomy of conquest. Take the walls, kill the soldiers, strip the city of its gold, burn what resists. You think you can predict what comes next. Then your Khan, the man who rose from a boy in a wooden yoke to rule more territory than any living ruler, steps forward into the courtyard with a parchment in his hand and a face like a ledger. He speaks in a quiet voice that carries farther than it should. He does not shout orders to kill or pillage. He does not roar. He announces a system. He points to people and names them useful or useless, skilled or surplus, to be moved or to be put to death. Men who months earlier were citizens with creeds and crafts, scholars and bakers, families with songs and debts and children. They are listed, tallied, parceled. For the first time since war became routine to you, you feel something you thought you'd lost. Not horror at the violence. You are used to that. But horror at the machinery. Something has been designed. Something legal. Something organized. It is not the chaos of raid and revenge. It is a rational plan. And that is what will make it linger in your bones. If you think stories like this deserve to be remembered, if you think the mechanics of power should never be mistaken for fate, hit like and subscribe to the Historical Archives. We are here to take apart how systems of violence are built and why remembering is a kind of resistance. You already know the broad outlines. A boy named Temujin, born in the steppes in the 1170s, rises from abandonment and enslavement to become Genghis Khan. But the familiar arc, the cruel childhood, the revenge, the warlord who unites the tribes, is only the surface. Underneath that rise is a deliberate legal architecture and an economic logic that turned conquered populations into a managed resource. By the end of this video, you will see why the most dangerous thing Genghis Khan invented was not greater cruelty, but a legal, repeatable system that made slavery predictable, efficient, and inseparable from statecraft. You will see how the same code that promised equality for Mongols codified exclusion for everyone else, and you will see why that matters beyond the 13th century. To understand how this happened, start with the smallest memories that teach a boy what power actually means. Picture Temujin at 9, his father murdered at a feast. The steppe is rituals betrayed, the clan that once protected them riding away. Imagine the cold and the hunger, and a mother who does not cry but teaches how to dig roots, how to catch marmots, how to chew something that still fills your stomach. The world shrinks into survival, bonds that were sacred, oaths, kinship, exchange of horses and wives, are revealed to be conditional. They crumble whenever a hungry man chooses himself. Then picture Temujin in chains. The wooden kangu that keeps a body upright, names removed, nights of humiliation and shuffling under other tents. He learns more than pain. He learns observation. The guards get drunk on certain nights. Discipline ebbs during feasts. Loyalty dissolves when incentive changes. He trains himself to wait for a weakness and to exploit it. He learns to see people as nodes of behavior, not merely as blood and name. All of that becomes the raw material for a political thought experiment. What if loyalty is remade not as kinship but as law? What if obedience is enforced impersonally, by a system so severe that betrayal is unthinkable? What if the state converts people into instruments by making some legally inside and others legally outside? This is where the moral twist begins. A code can be emancipatory for one group and instrumental for another. When Temujin declared himself Genghis Khan in 1206, he did not simply claim a throne, he offered a legal framework for a new polity, the Yassa. Seen in fragments, the Yassa looks startlingly modern. It forbids kidnappings of women, grants property protections to wives, legitimizes children born of slaves so they might rise by merit, mandates religious tolerance, and insists that any Mongol found enslaved must be freed. On the surface, the Yassa promises equality and stability. For many Mongols, it did exactly that. Crime dropped. Trade routes became safer. A clever shepherd could rise to command. Blood alone did not decide destiny. But laws are not just words. They define the boundaries of moral community. Hidden in the same code that protected the Mongol was an opposite clause. The legal personhood they enshrined applied only to Mongols. Non-Mongols were placed in a distinct legal category, subject peoples whose rights were negotiable and whose bodies could be appropriated as tribute. The Yassa drew a line: inside it, equality; outside it, utility. This split is the heart of the system. The Yassa did not abolish slavery in the abstract, it privatized humanity along ethnic lines. To make that line enforceable, Genghis reorganized a society that had been organized by clan into one organized by units and incentives. He remade the military and civic structure into Arban, Jagan Mingan, and Chuman. Your commander was no longer your kinsman, he was your function. If one man fled, 10 could die. If a Jagan failed, the Mingan could be punished. This system enforced obedience through collective accountability. It turned social cohesion into an administrative sanction. Betrayals were not only personal failures, they were threats to everyone nearby. But a system of internal order invites external extraction. Conquest became a predictable operation. Take a city, divide the population, and reassign them according to utility. The process you witness as a general in the ruined courtyard is not improvised carnage. It is triage. This is how it was practiced in cities like Bukhara and Samarkand and Nishapur. First, the coders are separated out: artisans, smiths, scribes, engineers, makers of irrigation and engines. Their skills are catalogued like entries in a ledger. Their names are written, their families attached, and they are invited, told, to relocate. They will be fed and housed in the Khan's workshops, paid in food and shelter if not in freedom, protected if they produce. For the skilled, this system offers a kind of perverse stability slavery framed as patronage. Second, able-bodied men are stripped and consigned to labor battalions. But these are not ordinary work gangs. Some are weaponized as human shields, driven forward into walls, forced to fill moats with their bodies, to absorb the arrow storms so Mongol troops need not. Their sacrifice is both practical and psychological. Future cities confronted with such a sight are more likely to capitulate than to fight. Third, women and children are sorted. The wording of historical accounts is careful here. Young women, those who might serve as concubines, domestic servants, or artisans, are reassigned, distributed, sometimes sold. Children are absorbed into Mongol households where, raised in the Khan's language and under Mongol patronage, they lose their original identities. This is cultural assimilation by other means. The child remains alive, but the memory of their origin dwindles. Fourth, the elderly and infirm, those who cannot be efficiently repurposed, vanish from the records. The absence of their stories is itself a mechanism of erasure. Watch this process unfold from a soldier's point of view, and the logic seems horrifyingly efficient. Labor becomes inventory, people become assets. Some generals take to this role with zeal. They keep lists, oversee transports, trade skilled captives like other goods. Others watch in uneasy silence, unsettled not by the brutality, but by the transformation of war into administration. Conquest becomes extraction, and extraction demands infrastructure. The Mongols then created the infrastructure. Moving tens of thousands of people across steppe and desert requires logistics. They established registries to track skills and people, supply lines to feed caravans, and administrative positions to manage relocations. A blacksmith taken from Bukhara could find himself in Karakoram alongside a Chinese engineer and a Persian goldsmith, building hybrid technologies that the Khan could then relocate across his dominions. In a grim sense, this was a globalized labor market before globalization, formed by force and regulated by law. The system also weaponized reputation. Rumors of the sorting, of the categories of the human shields, of the catalogued artisans, spread faster than armies. City governors, seeing the pattern repeat from Bukhara to Samarkand, sometimes surrendered before the walls were even breached. The threat of institutionalized enslavement became a tool of bloodless conquest. Capitulation brought life, but also loss of autonomy and annexation into the Khan's labor machine. This psychological mechanism magnified the system's reach beyond what swords alone could manage. Now let us narrow in to a single human storyline: a name, a face, a life reassembled from fragments. Imagine Fatima, a weaver in Bukhara. She is 30, skilled with a shuttle and dye. Her family has run a small dye house for generations. Their colors are sought after in markets from Samarkand to Khwarezm. When the Mongols arrive, she finishes a loom run and steps outside to see men across the square. The walls fall faster than anyone expected. Soldiers surge through the gate. Fatima grabs her daughter and runs. There is nowhere to go. The sorting begins. A clerk asks the questions. What is your craft? How many in your household? Can you work in a new language? Her hands, because they are collused and practiced, mark her as skilled. She is given a slip of parchment and told she will leave with a caravan bound for Karakoram. Relief flickers. To be taken is better than to be killed, yet relief mixes with the knowledge that she is an asset. At night she lies awake remembering the dye recipes tied to her family's lineage, the stories of her aunt who stole patterns from Persian books, the lullabies she used for her child. The thought of leaving is a slow murder of memory. On the march she watches other women assigned to different fates. Some are taken into the Khan's household. Others are sent to workshops where they craft textiles for Mongol elites. Fatima is productive, and the Khan scribes note it. Her family survives. Her daughter learns the Mongol tongue. Over years the color of their carpets becomes different. Patterns merge. Weavings fuse Persian motifs with Chinese geometry. If Fatima survives long enough, she may know the security of a roof and a steady ration. She survives by producing, and each rug she weaves becomes a ledger entry against the moral loss of the culture that made it. Her memory becomes woven into something else. Now imagine a second storyline that escalates the moral paradox: a jailed governor. A man once powerful, forced into a role that overturns the Mongols' own law. He is a Muslim governor who watched his garrison slaughtered, and now is given a choice: his life in exchange for delivering 10 skilled men to the Mongol camps in a year. He agrees. He spends months cataloguing his city's artisans, negotiating prices with merchants, and then handing over his own people. In the space of betrayal against his neighbors, he secures his survival. The law that once protected him is now a bargaining chip in the hands of the conqueror. These two human stories, Fatima the weaver and the governor who bargains with his conscience, reveal how the system produces moral collapses. It is not just the conqueror making decisions remotely, it is the conquered too, making impossible choices under pressure. Some will collaborate to survive. Others, like Fatima's neighbor who refuses to go, will be led to their deaths. The system creates incentives for self-policing, for neighbors to report neighbors in hope of mercy. It rewires communities into administrative units of compliance. To expand the view further, consider the administrators who made the machine run. They are not monsters drawn in caricature. They are functionaries, scribes with ink-stained fingers, quartermasters obsessed with head counts, clerks who write names into ledgers that decide destiny. Some of them were former slaves who, having survived and been elevated into the Khan's favor, performed the terrible work with grim efficiency. Others were local elites coaxed into cooperation with promises of preferential treatment. The moral calculus of an administrator is practical: one ledger entry might save a whole caravan from starving. It might prevent mutiny in the ranks. When survival and order are the highest goods, the arithmetic of human value becomes terrifyingly utilitarian. This is important because it shows how the system neutralized moral resistance. By making slavery into administration, the empire created roles that demanded participation. To refuse was to risk chaos, hunger, and death. That is why some generals, even when troubled, stayed. They could always rationalize. The artisans I send will build monuments and keep my people clothed. The laborers will build roads that will make trade safer. The young men forced as shields will at least have fed their families before they die. These are the internal logics of terrible governance. Make the immoral appear necessary. The macro consequences are fierce and long-lasting. Scholars estimate that the Mongol conquests precipitated demographic losses, but in some regions were catastrophic. Cities emptied, irrigation systems collapsed, agricultural rhythms were disrupted. Beyond sheer numbers, which range in estimates but are often counted in the millions, the cultural damage was deep. Libraries burned, scholars killed or dispersed, local crafts redirected. Yet, paradoxically, the Khan's labor system also redistributed knowledge and techniques. China's metallurgists found Persian paper makers. Central Asian architects exchanged ideas with Chinese carpenters. Out of violence came technological syncretism, but this was synthesis by coercion, not by free exchange. The economic ripples reshaped markets. A once local perfume trade now supplies an empire. A particular alloy technique becomes standard across 1,000 miles. Merchants who survived found new customers in imperial courts and in the camps of conal administrators. Whole families adjusted their identities to fit new roles. They might take Mongol names, learn the language, and marry into new communities. Over generations, lines blurred. But this assimilation was not cultural blending born of curiosity. It was a byproduct of an engine designed to extract value and to neutralize resistance by absorbing children, co-opting artisans and redirecting elite loyalties. And the system persisted. After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, his heirs did not dismantle the machinery, they expanded it. Hulagu's campaign in the Middle East executed the same processes. Kublai Khan's rule in China institutionalized forms of tribute that resembled the earlier sorting. The Golden Horde in Russia set up tribute demands with the same logic. Elements of the system, the registry, the forced migrations, the administrative categorization of human beings by usefulness, survived in different guises for centuries. In this way, the model outlived its originator, becoming a durable template for imperial extraction. This is also why historians struggle with Genghis Khan. Measured by some metrics, he was revolutionary for his people: meritocratic promotion, legal protections for Mongol women, religious tolerance within the domain of Mongol subjects, a reduction of internecine clan law. For his people, life could be safer, chance more meaningful. And yet this internal progressive governance sat atop an externally extractive machine. That paradox makes him hard to place in moral categories. He is not a caricature of pure evil. He was a rational state builder who engineered unequal protection into law. That rationality is what makes him more terrifying. Cruelty legal and methodical is harder to unsee than simple, chaotic violence. To bring this into contact with the present, sit with a simple structural question: how easily can a polity create a ring of protection for its N, while building mechanisms to exploit those labeled out? Ring the circle tighter with law, paperwork, and bureaucracy, and the exclusion becomes invisible to those inside. The voices that survive, the scribes, the architects, the merchants, will often speak of prosperity and order. The voices that disappear, the old, the infirm, the nameless, cannot refute them. That asymmetry produces narratives for the victors and silence for the victims. And yet sometimes memory resists. Among the archives of conquered cities are fragments of burnt ledger, a scratched marginalia, a child's prayer carved into a mosque wall. These fragments are small acts of defiance, traces that survived despite the empire's appetite for erasure. Paying attention to those fragments is how historians rebuild silenced lives. We stitch together patterns from receipts and ledgers, from travelers' tales, and from the dirt of abandoned courtyards. We reconstruct the human texture behind administrative categories. So where does that leave you? The general in the ruined courtyard, the viewer in your room, with the ledger in your hand and the faces on your mind, it leaves you with a recognition. Systems are designed. They are built with purposes and incentives. They make certain outcomes predictable. They also make certain moral choices structurally difficult. That recognition is not fatalistic, it is actionable. If injustice survives because it is lawful, then law can be a tool to dismantle it, but only if people intentionally redesign incentives, rewrite registers, and refuse to accept the categories the system imposes. We end where we began, with Temujin's paradox. The boy who had been treated as less than human reinvented a world that offered equality to some by denying it to others. He built stability and law for his people while casting other peoples into an industrial process of human reallocation. That duality is his legacy, a founding father whose architecture of governance included both protection and exploitation. It is a reminder that progress for one group does not automatically mean progress for humanity. Remember the faces you met in this story: Fatima at her loom, the governor bargaining for his life, the unnamed elderly who slipped from the record. Their lives were altered not just by conquest, but by a deliberate design. And remember this: naming the design is not the same as forgiving it. Naming is a first step toward dismantling. If this excavation of the past matters to you, if you want more episodes that examine how power organizes cruelty and how people survive inside it, subscribe to the Historical Archives. We don't neuter history, we trace the design choices that made it possible. Share this video with someone who thinks history is just a series of battles. Show them the ledgers. The boy who wore the slave's yoke became the man who built an empire. He gave his people law and opportunity, and gave the world a machine that turned human lives into data. It is that machine, orderly, legal, efficient, that should haunt us more than any single act of violence. Because systems are harder to dismantle than tyrants. They last longer. They make reasonable men do unreasonable things. So when you leave today, hold on to one uncomfortable thought: systems are made by choices, and choices can be remade. Remembering is not nostalgia, it is a responsibility. If you want to keep these voices from vanishing again, subscribe, share, and keep asking how the patterns of the past echo into the present. Thanks for watching the Historical Archives. We'll see you in the next episode, where we pull another thread of forgotten history and watch what comes undone.